Rashiq, great to see you.
Great to be here.
I'm excited about our conversation.
Me
I
too.
I had a very, very interesting chat with Roland Potmar of the Young Urbanists,
Yep.
and I'm keen to sort of get your view of where South African cities are right now and where you see the opportunities and possibly the problems, of course, going forward in this environment. We're obviously in 23 now. COVID's come and gone, hopefully, and technology is marching ahead at a tremendous pace. There's a huge amount of real estate that needs reinventing, rethinking, repurposing right now, which is just no longer relevant in this environment. Huge amount of office space, which has probably been cut almost in half in terms of the demand, especially the big blocks, big corporates. Flexible working is part of our life. Growth of online shopping, the way we socialize, the way we think about ourselves, everything is moving to some extent away from bricks and mortar in its old-fashioned sense. And adaptation and change and transformation in that space and how we use cities is just so critical now, especially now in South Africa. And I know you're doing a lot of interesting work in this space, and I'm so keen to hear your up-to-date views.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting coming out of the last few years and also different stages of that, hard lockdown, soft lockdown, sort of going back to work but not quite going back to an office. We've all been through and experienced these changes quite personally and professionally. I think the interesting thing about South African cities is that they were often designed not to work. We come from a history of them being designed to do the opposite of what most cities would do. So most cities bring people together because it's efficient. Most people have green spaces that people can use across the day and the night. People have access to good housing close-ish to where they live. So I think South Africa's history puts us on a massive sort of back foot. And now we're saying, okay, well, we're asking some of the simpler questions again. Why is this road so wide?
Yeah.
Do cars need to go at this speed? Especially in cities like Cape Town and Durban, where there's a reason to stay on the Durban Promenade. There's a reason to stay on Florida Road, to walk, to linger, to explore. You've transformed most of Florida Road in just the space of a few years. So there are reasons now in South Africa not just to get from point A to B, but to stay. But the very fabric and the design of the cities has been such a sort of challenge for so long. I think we're now starting to ask the right questions. And that doesn't mean just launching big, new, shiny, massive capital infrastructure projects. This is also about asking, what are the kinds of systems? What is the paperwork which law actually says you can't do that? What is the red tape? Is it red tape, or is it a city official who just doesn't want to budge on a particular issue? So I think we're starting to say, hey, we've got actually these amazing cities with lots of bricks and mortar, lots of public spaces. In some cities, you have the ocean, you have the mountains, you have the hills. Why hasn't it quite come together? What is the configuration where we start to get it right and start to see quality of life changes for the majority in their everyday life?
It's very interesting you bring up the point of we're still suffering out of the apartheid legacy in South Africa in such a big way. And I think the 2 points that you raise, the one about just the geographical way in which people and cities were split. They were seen as, workers would live there. These people would live there, and city would just be. We still call them CBDs, just business districts. Just like we would move the people to the business districts a couple of hours a day, traveling in the morning, a couple of hours a day in the afternoon, to get back home. So first, that physical geography, which is a legacy of apartheid, and then secondly, the way in which architects and the architecture of actual buildings have been thought about, where what lies underneath the thinking has always been about how do we protect ourselves from that outside, that frightening, vicious, apartheid-led world where we have sort of a set of enemies within. who are always potentially going to
Yeah.
take us out somehow. So when we think about the way that they've built convention centers, the way they built shopping centers, the way they built office buildings, the way everything is A to B with car, with underground parking,
Yeah.
lifts up, no sense of street, all high walls, no sense of street life. How do we interact and interrelate with each other and use the streets as an exciting place to invigorate our experiences of what neighborhoods and cities can be like? The root cause of that fundamental problem lies back in that apartheid era, and it was actually done by design. It was actually done by design, and of course, what happened post-apartheid is the secondary element of fear, something I was discussing with Roland in our previous chat. The fear of these places, the fear of the street, the fear of actually just being able to walk in your cities, which is stuff we take completely for granted in most cities in the world. No city is 100% safe anywhere, but they're at regular levels, and people don't have that perception that they're at risk somehow. And of course, post 94, there was a huge movement away from the cities, where everywhere else in the world, people were moving towards cities. Never before in human history have people moved towards cities in the volumes that they have over the previous 30 years. Yeah. In South Africa, they were moving away. So the getting over the hurdles of not only the physical geography of the layout of South Africa, but the way in which buildings have been built with so much concrete boxes are great challenges and have been for a long time. But right now, in this space, at this time, given the changes that have happened and the acceleration of technologies and the transformations we're seeing about the way in which we live and work and socialize and do everything else, I think there are just massive opportunities in the space of rejuvenating and regenerating and rethinking, reinventing existing buildings, existing places. Let's turn, you talked about these massive roads everywhere. Let's create parks in our cities. Let's create a space that people actually want to go, a social space, an exciting space, an interesting space. Not, let's get rid of this term CBD.
Yeah.
It's not, business will come out of it. Growth will come out of it. But the number one starting place, in my view, I don't know if you agree, is that you have to create cities that people want to go to for all sorts of different reasons. And I think that is the opportunity for serious growth here. And in fact, the fact that we haven't done it, and the fact that these buildings are sitting many areas in many cities have just not been, these issues have not been addressed, I think it's just a major opportunity. I don't know what you think.
I think you see it in not just in Cape Town or in Durban. You see it if you drive through parts of Johannesburg CBD, whether it's Braamfontein or around you. The volume of buildings that we need is, most of it is there. They need to be repurposed. They need to be redesigned. We need to find a way to sustainably include people and house them in sort of proper modern buildings that are sort of, meet all the requirements. But we all see them. We drive past these massive office parks. We drive past these massive sort of corporate headquarters. So in a sense, I'm not saying we shouldn't build more, but what we have is really just a jigsaw of reorganizing what we should do. I think you make a good point about CBDs, and cities just need a heart or multiple hearts. That's what people are attracted to. And they should all be thriving, whether they are sort of business focused, whether they are focused more on arts or tourism. We're human after all, so people are attracted to activity, to socializing, to where there's entertainment. We see this with young people a lot. They will use the bus, train, minibus, taxi, bicycle. They'll use whatever means to get to where the excitement's happening, whether that means taking a long journey or not. So I think it's perhaps how do we instill the heart back into our cities?
I totally agree with that.
That fabric that's there.
With what's there already. But what I would say is that if you don't do it, if you don't do that, people are just going to leave. If you don't provide young people with the opportunity to have those types of experience, it's almost like a total human need. They're just going to go elsewhere to many other cities in the world, or even in the country. You know, many are coming to Cape Town because Cape Town really is starting to provide a lot of those types of experiences. You know, in other pockets in around the country, it is attracting young people. Yeah. And of course, what's interesting, and I learned this many years ago when we were working in the East End of London, when I spoke to the CEOs of the tech companies that were moving to the East End, and I said, well, why are you wanting to move your company here? Because these guys, I can assure you, mainly wanted to be in the West End and traditional areas of London. No, we're moving because our people, our young people, the people, our teams, they want to be here. And why do they want to be here? They don't want to just be there to work. They want to be there to work. They want to socialize. Everything that they do is kind of within a walkable, bikeable, easily accessible sort of position. And that's where they want to be. Yeah. So what actually happens is that it comes bottom-up approach. If you want to attract the best, the brightest, the most dynamic teams, then the business comes to those areas. So if you look at it the other way around and say, okay, well, let's create a city which is hugely exciting for young people, and we also need business here. What's going to happen is if you create the society, spaces that are exciting for young people that have a whole range of different activities, work and commerce is drawn towards it, and it becomes a self-fulfilling upward spiral. And I just find that dynamic so exciting, and the opportunity so big here in South Africa, especially when you take into account how little it's been done. Yeah. And I think as a company, as Urban Lime, it's an extraordinary opportunity for us because there literally are just so few people have the skill sets who understand these types of buildings, how to work with brownfield sites, how to work with the connecting buildings, how to create areas, you were talking to experiential type developments, how you create spaces where actually, how do you feel in that space should be almost the very first question. Now, how do you feel in the public spaces around it? How do you connect to other spaces? These are the first questions you should be asking. Most developers, they start with a spreadsheet and how much it's all going to be worth. At Urban Lime, we start with how does it feel? And how can we get it to be something that's really very special, very different, very unique, that hits a spot that takes it somewhere new. And I think that was the sort of points that you were sort of alluding to when you're thinking about. It takes a lot to get me out of my bed. I've got a hell of a lot on my phone. I can have meetings. I can do everything. You know. So get me to go somewhere. It's got to be good, and it's got to be exciting. It's got to be dynamic, and I've got to be able to do some good stuff when I'm there. And I've got to be lingering. I want to hang there the whole day. I don't want to just stay there to park my car and do one thing.
Yeah, and I mean, at our Future Cities, we actually, a few months ago, updated our manifesto, which said that we don't just want sustainable and equitable cities. We want cities that are loved, exciting, vibrant, and interesting, because we're human. Humans are not, you could have a very problematic city that young people want to leave, and you could also have this sort of cold, sustainable, but sort of uninteresting, dull place that's kind of so perfect. And on both ends of the spectrum, you don't speak to a city in which young people want to see the kinds of musicians they want to see in small venues and big venues. I know of people who take a bus or travel to different cities to go see a particular concert that doesn't come to their city or town, where they want to study and what they want to study. It's not the same as 10, 20 years ago. You can do everything from sports science to robotics to, medical sciences, all within South Africa and in particular cities. So it's almost like looking at these clues. If you just listened and looked and almost start to see where young people were gathering, you can start to see what they're interested in. And sometimes we make the joke called, in cities, on urbanism, there's sometimes things that always work. Skateboard urbanism, for example.
Yeah.
There's some things that are just always going to work.
Just winners, yeah.
You have this idea, you put 2 or 3 ramps in the lobby of one of your buildings, and it's not going to, they're not going to necessarily rent 15 floors of a massive commercial building, but that's where young people want to be. They want some ramps. They want some, what are those poles, where they do the jumps off from it. You put that sort of that ramp or those pipe tracks anywhere. And
great spaces kind of need to be layered.
Yeah.
And the experience that you have, there's got to be multi-dimensional.
Yeah.
And I also like the sense of the unexpected.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that the way we approach, and I know that you do as well, is that the experiential side of it and the small bits and the unexpected and how to create spaces which really are sticky in terms of people wanting to stay there, wanting to go there, choosing to be there. And my preference is they're choosing to go there for no particular reason other than it's there. That's when you're in a great space, when you're wandering around Venice or you're wandering around Amsterdam or you're running around the center of London. Why are you there? You're not to go anyway. You're there because you're there. You've created something just a fabulous thing, and it's a thing in its own right, and it's in a way at its best. It's the greatest theatre ever invented, and it's really talks to something which I think is very fundamental about who we all are, and that is something you can't get at home on your phone completely. You can start to tap into some of it in the virtual world and where that's heading, and AI and all of that stuff is going to start to interact with it. And of course, getting that blend between the virtual and the real is something where real estate is going. So it's not discounting, it's working with it. It can enhance the experience. It can be part of the experience. And maybe your experience even starts at home. But it needs to be integrated in every level, from the practicalities of actually using buildings, access, security, and all of those types of things, but right the way through to facilities management and all of that type of stuff. But when you take the technical out of it, you have to think about the starting point is what's the human experience. And I think that's where we are so aligned in terms of how we think about cities. And the human experience is not just an experience for the automobile or where you park and all those things. In fact, interestingly, I was just thinking when you were talking about great cities and being a bit edgy and not perfect, I was thinking that the best city I've ever spent time in a particular point in history was New York City in the 80s, in Manhattan, before they cleaned it up. It was the most exciting, interesting, but it had an edge. Was it a little dangerous? Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But what a place. And what a place. I mean, it just had a magnetic draw. And it drew creatives and drew exciting people, and it drew academics, and it drew young people. And in fact, it drew everybody, and what was created out of that city at that time was just off the charts. It's still a good city, but it's a different city now. It's a different city now.
I think it almost speaks to that. If you speak of New York in the 80s, it almost sounds like when lots of young people had freedom to express and to be in a city where there were lots of opportunities to do that. As you said, it wasn't the safest. That not every facility or building was perfect, but it attracted lots of young people wanting to pursue careers, whether it be business or the arts. And New York was sort of the canvas, this sort of space where they could really just completely express themselves. And I think the less we limit the movement of young people in South African cities, the more we allow them to sort of go inside and go through. I think we're still a bit, as you said, we put up high fences and high walls and security in the hopes that nobody who's not meant to be there goes through. But young people are more curious. They want to go past the front gate. They want to see what's there. They want to walk through laneways. They want to cycle through parts they're not meant to cycle through. So I think it's actually a different, and they have the means to. With their devices, they no longer have to necessarily guess about what's behind that wall. Okay, well, I see this amazing facade that's designed by a heritage architect. I'd like to see the other side. Can I see the other side? Can I go in? It's published in a blog. Someone's already seen it. So I think it's curiosity, but there's also information now and data.
Yeah.
They know when the next top sneaker releases or when the next musicians coming to town, or something they'd like to study or produce or make something. They know where they can make it. So I think it's a different time now in which we should limit the freedom of people's ideas and movement, especially young people, because they have the information to back up what they'd like to pursue, and the fewer barriers there are, the better. But I can see the perspective, walking through South African cities where actually you're really, your face is against concrete. There's nothing which flows from if we think of the Durban CBD, which is humongous. It stretches from the harbour, literally into the promenades to the convention centre and beyond.
Yes.
And then sometimes it feels like you're arriving at different islands in the Durban CBD. So if you're in the promenade, you're there, but then to go to the convention centre, that's almost sort of a different island, and then you go to a different island.
And there's about 3 6-lane highways that can get you there. You've got a choice of 3 within the middle of the city centre. But it's so interesting how small interventions can make such a big difference, and what you are talking about is so completely different to the concrete walls of shopping centres, to the lifeless, sterile environments that have kind of come out of how do we build this building so it's as safe as possible once you park your car to get in and out of there. It's like a different language. It's like a totally different language, which we are starting to introduce. And I think when people come to Cape Town and parts of Durban and parts of Johannesburg as well, in pockets, it's happening. You mentioned Braamfontein. But when they start to get a feel for that, and of course they're traveling now, everyone's everywhere. And there's something also very democratic and very leveling up about what's happening, is that, anybody who has a laptop or a phone can now communicate, trade with, socialize with the globe. That is a leveling up process for Africa. And that is a huge opportunity, to create opportunities for our people to actually trade, communicate, and work with anyone in the world from anywhere. We just have to create spaces that talk to that. That talk to that need. And we have, what's critical in this economy, I was talking with Roland earlier about the need. We have anemic growth in this country, huge unemployment, anemic growth. We have to supercharge this growth, and to supercharge this growth, we have to provide environments where young people can start leveraging that leveling up process that's happening by the fact that they can communicate and trade with the world. Africa's not just. It doesn't matter. Someone in New York doesn't care. They're talking to someone in Cape Town or in London or in wherever, in Langa. It doesn't make any difference to them. Okay, you can open up conversations. You can do business. You can be creative. You can do things with people from anywhere. That's a huge advantage for a country which has had the history that this country has had.
And was cut off from the world in a certain way for a long time.
It was cut off from the world, and it had a policy, as you were saying earlier, of geographically cutting its own people off from each other and not creating mixed-use environments where people both live and work in normal cities, not in these CBDs. Wasn't the normal way. It's starting to happen now, and this process is. It's gone a long way since we started in 2005. I can tell you that. In all these cities, it's gone a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And of course, given where we are with tech, it's changing all the time. It's never one blueprint. I would say that point. And the other thing I would say, which I thought was very interesting, which you brought up, was the fact that this must never be a top-down master blueprint type of approach. If we're talking about the future of the city, there's an element of sort of town planning, of course, one can do. And there's an element that, the private sector and the public sector need to work together on certain areas and try and map out roughly what we kind of want to achieve. But my experience of urban regeneration is very much that it's incremental, and that what you want to do is be a catalyst. You want to create catalytic developments, either districts or even individual buildings, which can be a catalyst, which says to others, let's also get involved. And of course, they get involved in their own way. There's not a blueprint. Everyone does their own buildings differently. Every building's unique from each other. And every person and every developer and everyone behind these buildings are unique individuals, and they've got their own. So I don't like the idea of, especially these things like, you have your gated community and there's one architect appointed or one design structure and all the houses look the same. I mean, that's, for me, that's a utopian nightmare. What I love is the organic nature of cities, and the best cities were built building by building, street by street, without really much of a plan.
Yeah.
In fact, London was built specifically like that. They actually built it on purpose like that to stop invading armies coming in. They thought we'd just make it all completely make no sense. That's why before you had sat navs, the black taxi drivers had to take long exams to be able to learn all the different roads, because there's no rhyme or reason to any of it. And in fact, in many ways, the best cities are like that, and they've happened literally just like that, building by building, organically, street by street. And you end up with the most unbelievable, not only theatre, exciting, multi-use, multicultural, but also an absolute dynamism for business. It all happens kind of together. You end up with this massive explosion. And that is the reason cities as a concept has been such a successful concept. And that's why so many people have moved to them over the last, have been moving to them for a very long time now.
Yeah, I think our past made people or certain groups of people afraid of what happens when we bring all that density of people together, as you say. What happens if all the cultures and races and genders and professionals and practitioners, what happens if we all really live together closely and work together and incrementally upgraded our cities? So we often speak about Durban, and what if the 10 or 20 best artists in Durban were commissioned to paint or design just simple walking routes, from the stadium to the promenade to Florida Road? And wouldn't that be really exciting to start to see the culture and the art of the city reflected in its spaces? And everyone knows when you walk those routes, they are well lit, they are safe, they attract people from across the city. People actually want to go and see those walking paths between all these different destinations, and add to that more opportunities to live there, and add to that more opportunities to do sport, and add to that better public transport. And you start to realize that what we're not looking for is a big shiny new city somewhere else, far away in the middle of nowhere. We actually just need to bring people and their talents closer together, and that closer together sometimes digitally, which is, what is my community online in the world? How do I serve the world or connect with the world? And it's also geographically and physically. How do I physically bring people together? And I think that's where we're seeing these big shifts, because should a university be on a campus that's single rise, far away, with sports fields? Could it not be in an inner city? Couldn't you house people in a space that has the gyms and the restaurants and the entertainment right where they live? So it's
and those opportunities are really ripe now, because big companies, major companies have no use for their 25,000 square meter campuses. So what do you do with them? Okay, and the types of things you're talking about in the wellness space, in the education space, in the housing space, in the social housing space, I think there are so many different opportunities to repurpose and rethink these buildings, mixed-use developments, experiential type developments, leisure type developments. There's so many different opportunities of using these buildings, most of which are actually fabulous. I mean, I've a lot of the last year I've spent touring empty buildings, from the major banks who are just closing down campuses all over the country, the insurance companies, other parastatals and major corporates across South Africa are literally just, they've got no use for these buildings. You go in there, there's like a handful of people in a 25,000 square meter building that was designed for thousands of people to be working there. There's a handful of people working there. So what's the next step with these? And I think the things that you mentioned, the points that you make, this is exactly where Urban Lime is going. Yeah. We're creating solutions to the problem of what do you do with buildings that no longer have a purpose in the modern age. And I would say that's what excites us on a daily basis. I'm listening to you, and we're speaking exactly the same language. And when you combine it with a city approach of tactical urbanism, walkability, thinking about people instead of cars, thinking about experience, what it feels like to be in spaces, the relationship between the private and the public sector, bringing those together in some sort of properly well-organized way. And to be frank, we have to have proper governance to make this all happen. That's what's holding it back is getting those partnerships happening, and people not just thinking about the massive, huge, expensive project, but let's do lots of small things, because small things change people's perceptions. And if suddenly they've got an idea that we're going back to where we started, dangerous spaces, how do you change people's perception that this is no longer a dangerous space? That's more like a psychological question than a question for a property developer. But the answer to that is exactly where Urban Lime sits, in that, how do we do that? How do we make people feel safe? Because there's the real issue around safety. Okay, that's an issue. And then there's the issue around the perception of safety, which is a totally different issue. But they're both real. If the place is totally safe, but you perceive it not to be, it's, as far as urban regeneration is concerned, it makes no difference. They're the same thing. Yeah. So look, I can tell you, New York in the 80s was not considered a safe place, and it wasn't really a safe place. In many, you had to be super careful. I mean, no, but it was an amazing place. So one has to blend not only the reality about creating places that are safe enough. No city is 100% safe. Nothing is 100% safe. We all might not go home tonight. Nothing's 100% safe. But it's got to be safe enough, okay? But the big challenge we face here is that we have to change people's perceptions around what the cities are for, why I go to them, what's the purpose of them, how I can enjoy them, and that they are safe enough. That has to happen. And I think I think it's mainly happened in Cape Town, and it is happening in Durban in pockets for sure, and it's happening in Johannesburg in pockets for sure. But once it spreads, these cities could be absolutely amazing. And you tie that in with an economic environment where it's so much more expensive to build new buildings. It makes no sense from an environmental perspective, or from a renewables perspective, or from a healthy building perspective. All of the trends are working towards reinvention and the reuse of space. And I just find that the exciting space for, I think there's a window, but I think the next 5 years, in my view, in South Africa, going from a place where there are, a couple of different companies that specialize in this area, it wouldn't surprise me if there are hundreds within a few years, because this is the space. And I think it's also, in many ways, the future of our country and the prosperity of our country and the future of our people, and getting that unemployment rate from wherever it is to where it needs to be, where, in fact, most people should be employed, not the sort of other way around. You need to have a few percent that aren't employed for whatever reason. But to get to a point of near or full employment, we have to make major transformations, and the starting point is A, the cities, and B, working with what we've got. And it's quick. It's not only quicker, it's cheaper, it's more environmental, it's more human. There's a certain, also, you talk about things not being so perfect. There's some great beauty in things that people almost, they look at them as eyesores, or there's actually a lot of beauty in what's been built. One just has to kind of maybe layer it, bring some life back into it, add some maybe interventions here and there, get some exciting new architecture maybe happening alongside it or with it or on top of it or around it. Think about the public spaces. Suddenly you've got stuff which people thought, oh, that was very drab, boring, dull. You introduce those 10 artists you're talking about in Durban, you do one or two other minor interventions, suddenly you've got a great space. It's not magic, but it talks to what people really want.
And I think our job is probably as translators and as communicators to say to governments, to business, to civil society, to young people, what is our reinvention journey together? As you said, some projects it's going to be very particular. It's going to be about how do you house, educate, train groups of young people in sort of safe, modern, urban, vertical campuses. And other times it will be a different group. How do you encourage small businesses young people to start small businesses and use the technology that's available these days, 3D printing, whatever artisanal skills they have, and produce something from that. So I think it's how do we get the government and big corporates with big office spaces to come along that reinvention journey, not to sort of they're allowed to be hesitant and skeptical, but to begin to reimagine that I have this building or this campus. Oh, well, the ground floor could be this. On weekends, the rooftop could be this. And I think it also stems back to that sort of ideology of the past of control. Who's allowed in, who's allowed out? What happens if we start mixing different floors? What happens if we...
It's interesting, Rashiq, that you bring that up.
If we do that.
Because what's changed in the last year, from our perspective, is that those groups that you talk about, governments, local governments, major corporates, parastatals, they're coming to us. They're so eager for a solution because actually they're just sitting on empty buildings. They've completely lost purpose to the buildings. There are lots of buildings that are 20,000 square meters plus, which are just empty. And they are coming to us for solutions. How can you help us with the benefit of your experience? Create something and do something with this space. Before, they kind of had a halfway house and they were using buildings in a certain sort of way, and it was just about okay. They never loved these buildings. They were always too small for them. They were usually apartheid legacy type buildings for the major insurance companies and banks and stuff like that, sitting in the middle of the cities. It wasn't their core business. What their core business was building shopping centers outside of the cities, or office buildings and office parks and residential gated communities and stuff. So it was never their core business, but they kind of hung on to these buildings. But because of what's happened over the last couple of years, suddenly it's got to the point where they're saying we have to find a solution for these buildings. And the amount of calls and the amount of conversations that we're having as a company, it's never before.
Yeah.
And that's a huge opportunity, both for them and for us, in being able to assist and work towards really proper, fundamental, exciting, dynamic, modern solutions to what they consider essentially is just a problem.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's not their business. They're not in, they're not even the property business, never mind in the type of very specialized area that Urban Lime is in. But there's not much. They have a real interest in there's been a real interest in finding the solutions. There's been a real desire to find solutions also from the city, and also trying to bring the cities back after COVID and so on and so forth, from the cities, but also from the corporates. Yeah. They want to find solutions now, and that we find very exciting and a bit of a sea change. I think that the key thing for 23 and going into 24 is those conversations with the major companies, the parastatals, local government and national government. How do we start rethinking about what development means? How do we use the current set of circumstances to reinvent the layout, to work with and start finding proper solutions to the post-apartheid legacy? In terms of not only in terms of the geographical issues that we discussed before, but also the architecture and the way in which we think about cities and all of that stuff. I think this opens up an opportunity, huge opportunity, to start having proper conversations, real conversations, and not only have conversations, actually getting on site, partnering with best-in-class partners, and creating brilliant catalytic developments on scale. I think that is a huge opportunity from our side. And what your thoughts are.
I think that opportunity is so huge, because when you talk about public infrastructure or the public sector, you're talking about both large buildings, but you're also talking about transport infrastructure, large parcels of land, and how do you unlock those as well? And how do you sort of link? So the partners you're bringing on board are thinking about that building, but they're also thinking about, how do I improve that connection to that train station? How do I get that street or road to work better? I think for myself, the big opportunity is, how do we pull all these buildings back into the street and allow it at scale?
Yes.
We say to everyone, especially on these 6-lane, 8-lane streets that are often one way, we give you the permission to reach out further into the street, to open up. We give you the 2-day permit where it takes 2 days to apply, and let's try. I think Paris did this. They sort of said, well, you can plant some things on the pavement. You can put out some tables and chairs. You can encourage young people to hang out here. I think it's that reaching out of these buildings, which are going to be reinvented internally and externally, but let them reach out a bit more. And I think that's where the public-private part comes. I think government often forgets that part where a building or precinct goes beyond what they should be doing, goes outside their borders, and that's where the partnership comes in. You don't have to do it all on your own. You can actually have this reinvented corporate campus that actually reaches for the streets, whether it's through walking, through cycling, through cafes, through hangout spots for various groups. So I think it's that reaching out, letting more of it happen. I think that the days of a central institutional government delivering every piece of public infrastructure is over. That also introduces opportunities for temporary use, especially when there are bigger sites or bigger buildings. Perhaps one of the floors could be for artists. Perhaps one of the floors could be for a particular college or a particular government department. I don't know. What about a crazy idea of having like an arts and culture department with artists in the same building, with recording studios and film studios, just actually mixing it all up. And I think that's going to be quite exciting to see. What happens if people are given permission to now occupy space and go beyond their building. Yeah,
totally agree. It's been great chatting.
Yeah, it's been amazing. We should do them often.
All right. I'm in.